A wounded German shepherd stood trembling on a frozen road, her body bruised, her breath shallow, her eyes still burning with duty. Behind her, 10 tiny puppies rose on shaking legs, begging the night for help they didn't understand. Miles away, a former Navy SEAL drove through the snow, carrying a past heavy with silence and loss, unaware that God was guiding his path. He didn't stop because of instinct. He stopped because something greater called him. What he found wasn't just a rescue, it was a test of faith, courage, and compassion that would change every life involved. This is a story about loyalty that refuses to die and miracles that arrive disguised as choices. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below and let us know you're here. And sometimes a miracle does not fall from the sky in a burst of light. Sometimes it waits quietly on the side of a forgotten road, wearing the shape of a wounded dog, 10 trembling puppies, and one human being who chooses to stop. In moments like these, it feels as though God does not always reach down to change the world himself, but instead places his hand gently on a shoulder and whispers, "Go, be my hands today." Ethan stopped. Luna trusted. The puppies stood. And through those small acts of courage, something holy moved through the ordinary cold of the world. In our daily lives, we pass many roads like this one. Not all are covered in snow. Some are lined with loneliness, silent suffering, or quiet cries we pretend not to hear. The miracle is not that pain exists. It is that love still answers it. Each time we choose kindness over indifference, courage over comfort, we become part of God's quiet work on earth. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that your choice to stop, to care, to act, may be the miracle someone else has been praying for. Please share this story with those who need hope today. Leave a comment to let us know how it made you feel, and subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, compassion, and redemption can reach hearts that are waiting. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect you on every road you walk, heal what is wounded within you, and give you the courage to be a light when the world feels cold. Amen. Winter pressed its silence over a forgotten rural highway, snow drifting like ash from a tired sky, the road stretching empty as if the world itself had chosen to look away. The man driving the old dark blue pickup truck was named Ethan Cole, a former Navy SEAL, 42 years old, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with a posture that never fully relaxed even in civilian clothes. His face was angular, carved by years of discipline and regret, a strong jaw shadowed by a short, untrimmed beard streaked faintly with gray, as if time had begun its quiet negotiations. His eyes, steel blue and alert, were the kind that missed nothing, not because he wanted to notice everything, but because he had learned the hard way what happened when you didn't. Ethan wore a weathered brown jacket pulled tight against the cold, hands steady on the wheel, knuckles scarred from a life that once demanded violence in the name of order. He had been discharged 3 years earlier after a failed, overseas operation where a delayed command cost civilian lives. Since then, Ethan no longer trusted orders easily, and he trusted silence even less. He spoke politely to strangers, kept distance with neighbors, and carried himself with a quiet courtesy that masked an ocean of unresolved guilt. Driving helped him think, and thinking was the only thing that kept the memories from roaring too loudly at night. He was heading nowhere in particular. That, too, was intentional. The rural road cut through fields frozen stiff under snow, broken occasionally by skeletal trees and leaning wooden posts. No houses, no traffic, just wind and the soft hiss of tires on ice. Ethan's breath fogged the windshield briefly before the heater caught up, and in that momentary blur, something moved ahead on the road. He slowed instinctively, his body reacting before his mind could reason. Training did that. It rewired a man to respond before fear could speak. 10 small shapes emerged through the snowfall. Puppies. German Shepherd puppies, no more than 8 weeks old, their fur thick but uneven, black and tan coats puffed up against the cold. They were too young to understand danger properly, too young to be out here at all. What made Ethan's chest tighten was not just their presence, but their posture. One by one, they rose onto their hind legs, wobbling, paws lifted clumsily toward the road, toward him. It was awkward and almost absurd, like children imitating adults without knowing why. Under different circumstances, Ethan might have smiled. Instead, his stomach dropped. Animals didn't do this without reason. Not here, not in weather like this. He stopped the truck completely, engine idling low, and stepped out. The cold bit immediately at his face, sharp and unforgiving. The puppies whimpered softly, their dark eyes wide, reflecting fear more than hunger. Ethan crouched slightly, keeping his movements slow, his voice calm, though his heart had begun to accelerate. He had seen fear like this before, in villages, in evacuation zones, in the eyes of those who had learned too early that help did not always arrive. The puppies shuffled closer but did not touch him, glancing repeatedly toward the tree line behind them. That was when Ethan noticed the marks in the snow, drag lines, blood, faint but unmistakable. He followed the trail with his eyes first, then his feet, every muscle in his body tightening as the familiar hum of a mission mindset returned. Near a weather-beaten wooden pole stood a German shepherd, fully grown, female, her body tall and muscular despite its current weakness. She was bound tightly with thick rope, her movements limited, her breathing shallow and uneven. A dark sack had been torn from her head, hanging loose around her neck, stained and damp. Her coat was matted with snow and blood, ribs rising and falling under bruised flesh. She was young, maybe 3 years old, but her eyes held an intelligence sharpened by hardship. They locked onto Ethan immediately, not with aggression, but with a fierce, trembling vigilance. This was Luna, though Ethan did not yet know her name, a working-line German shepherd with strong legs, erect ears torn slightly at the edges, and a gaze that spoke of loyalty forged through suffering. Even bound, even beaten, she tried to shift her body between him and the puppies, straining against the rope with a low, warning growl that dissolved into a whimper. Ethan's throat tightened. He had seen soldiers do that, shield others even when broken. Kneeling slowly, he raised his hands to show he carried no threat, speaking softly, though the wind tried to steal his words. Inside him, something old and painful stirred. This was not combat. There were no uniforms, no flags, no radio chatter. Yet the weight felt heavier than any numbered mission he had ever received. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had needed this dog silent. That thought alone chilled him more than the snow. He reached for his knife to cut the rope. Ethan felt the shift within himself, the quiet, irreversible click of purpose locking into place. Whatever had happened here was not over, and without realizing it, without permission or command, he had already accepted a mission that would not appear in any report, but would change everything that followed. The clearing beyond the tree line looked ordinary at first glance, a patch of frozen earth scarred by tire tracks and scattered footprints. But to Ethan it carried the sharp, metallic scent of danger that never truly faded from certain places. He moved slowly now, one hand resting near his jacket, where habit insisted a weapon should be, even though there was none, only a knife and years of muscle memory. Luna's breathing rasped behind him, uneven but stubborn, the sound anchoring him to the present as his eyes traced the scene backward in time. He could almost reconstruct it as he had done countless times overseas, the trucks arriving under cover of dusk, engines idling low, men stepping out with practiced confidence. The first of them, Marco Hale, would have stood out immediately, mid-30s, tall and broad, with a shaved head that revealed a pale scar running from temple to ear, his beard thick and dark, trimmed sharply as if discipline still mattered to him. Marco was the kind of man who spoke little and watched much, his calm born not of kindness but of experience. He had grown up around violence, learned early that fear was a currency, and he spent it freely on others. Beside him would have been Caleb Voss, leaner, restless, his blonde hair pulled back into a short knot, pale skin flushed red from the cold, eyes that flicked constantly from shadow to shadow. Caleb talked too much when nervous, joked when he should have stayed quiet. The sort of man who laughed loudest just before doing something unforgivable. A third figure, barely remembered by anyone afterward, Jonah Pike, shorter and older, with a soft belly under his jacket and a graying mustache, had likely driven one of the vehicles. He wasn't cruel by nature, just weak, the kind who followed stronger men to avoid becoming a target himself. They had brought crates, heavy and rectangular, wrapped in oilcloth and plastic, the weight of them bending the tailgates of their trucks. Inside were rifles and parts, black market weapons bound for hands that did not ask questions. It should have been simple, it always was. But Luna had been there first, moving silently through the trees, drawn by unfamiliar sounds and the instinct to patrol what she considered her territory. She had not barked, she had not attacked. She had only watched, her amber brown eyes reflecting headlights as she memorized faces and movements, the way working dogs did when trained to observe. When Marco finally noticed her silhouette between the trees, the moment had stretched thin, like glass about to shatter. He understood immediately what she represented: a witness. Fear did not explode. It curdled. Caleb had cursed, his voice too loud, his breath fogging wildly as he reached for something he did not end up using. Jonah had frozen, hands lifted uselessly, as if surrendering to an animal that did not care about excuses. Marco, however, had acted. He always did. They had cornered Luna quickly, ropes already in, the truck for reasons none of them liked to name. The beating that followed was not chaotic. It was controlled. Each blow meant to teach a lesson rather than end a life. Luna had fought until her strength gave out, teeth snapping once before a kick drove the air from her lungs. When they tied her to the pole and dragged the sack over her head, it was not just to hide her eyes, but to hide themselves from what those eyes reflected back at them. They left her there because killing her felt unnecessary, and because men like Marco believed survival without power was punishment enough. Ethan stood now where they had stood then, the cold seeping through his boots as anger rose slow and heavy in his chest. He had known men like these, had worked alongside some, hunted others. The difference, he realized, was not in the act itself, but in the excuse wrapped around it. He knelt beside Luna again, checking the knots, the bruising along her ribs, the swelling around one eye. She trembled when his fingers brushed her fur, then steadied, her ears twitching as if she were listening for engines that might return. Ethan spoke softly, more to himself than to her, promising nothing out loud, yet feeling the shape of a vow forming inside him. The puppies huddled closer now, their earlier bravery replaced by exhaustion, their small bodies pressing against one another for warmth. In the distance, a low rumble drifted through the trees, faint but real, an engine, or memory pretending to be one. Ethan straightened slowly, scanning the road, his senses sharpening as the weight of the situation settled fully into place. This was no longer just a rescue. Someone had tried to erase evidence, and erasing evidence was the mark of a crime that did not end neatly. As snow continued to fall, softening edges and hiding tracks, Ethan understood that whatever came next would demand more than compassion. It would demand the same clarity he had once reserved for missions that came with maps and signs. The difference now was simple and terrifying. No one else was coming, and the truth Luna carried was still alive, breathing in the cold. The memory did not come to Luna as images alone, but as sensations layered deep in muscle and instinct, the way working dogs remembered danger long after wounds had healed. As Ethan stayed close, keeping watch on the road, Luna's breathing slowed enough for her mind to drift backward to the moment when everything had narrowed to one terrible choice. The men had been shouting then, their voices sharp and overlapping, but she had focused only on her pups. 10 small bodies, barely steady on their legs, their coats still carrying the soft, milky scent of infancy. They had been hidden beneath a fallen log at the edge of the trees, a place Luna had chosen carefully days earlier, knowing without knowing why that the world had grown unsafe. When the first blow struck her ribs, Luna did not cry out. Pain was familiar. She had been trained once, briefly, by a handler who taught her discipline, but was taken away before the bond could fully form. That early separation had shaped her temperament, watchful, independent, deeply protective, trusting slowly, and loving fiercely once trust was earned. As she was dragged away from the trees, her claws scraped frozen earth, not in panic, but in calculation. She twisted her head just enough to see the pups shift in their hiding place, their ears perked, their bodies trembling. That was when she made the decision no mother should have to make. She had stopped fighting. The men mistook it for surrender. It was not. With a low, controlled sound that barely passed her throat, Luna issued the only command she could give without words. Rise, be seen, seek the tall ones who walk on 2 legs. She had learned, through instinct and observation, that humans were unpredictable but powerful, capable of both cruelty and salvation. If her pups were noticed, there was a chance, however small. If they stayed hidden, there would be none. The puppies responded unevenly at first. Ash, the smallest male, dark-faced with a white star on his chest, barely managed to straighten before tumbling back into the snow, squeaking in confusion. Mira, a slightly larger female with one ear permanently folded, nudged him with her nose and tried again, her thin legs shaking violently. One by one they followed, copying the movement without understanding its meaning, driven by the authority in their mother's gaze. They wobbled forward onto the open road, rising onto hind legs that had never carried such responsibility. Paws lifted clumsily as balance betrayed them again and again. It was not bravery as humans defined it. It was obedience layered with love. Back in the present, Ethan watched those same puppies now, their small chests rising quickly, bodies pressed together for warmth. He could see traces of their individuality even through exhaustion. One had a darker mask, another lighter paws, another eyes too large for his face, giving him a perpetually startled expression. They were alive because of a decision made in seconds, under violence, by a creature the men had dismissed as disposable. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs, a familiar pressure that preceded action. He had lost teammates once because a civilian had been too afraid to step into the road, too unsure whether intervention was worth the risk. The thought that these puppies had done what grown men sometimes could not left him both humbled and furious. Luna shifted weakly, her head lifting as she checked the pups again, counting them in a slow, deliberate sweep of her eyes. 10. Still 10. Only then did her body sag slightly, the tension easing just enough to allow the pain back in. Ethan noticed immediately. He moved closer, lowering himself until he was level with her gaze, speaking in a low, steady voice meant to reassure rather than command. Luna did not bare her teeth. She watched him carefully, weighing him the way she had once weighed the men in the clearing, and finding something different. His posture was open, but not careless. His movements economical, controlled. He smelled of cold metal, oil, and something else, restraint. As the wind picked up, carrying snow across the road in thin, whispering sheets, a new sound joined it. The distant echo of a vehicle door slamming, far off but unmistakable. Ethan's head snapped up, senses narrowing. Luna's ears pricked instantly, her body tensing despite exhaustion. The puppies whimpered, instinctively shrinking closer together. Whatever happened next, it was clear that the past was not finished with them. Luna had given her final command believing it might be the last act of her life. Instead, it had set something else in motion, something neither she nor the men could have predicted. And as Ethan rose to his feet, positioning himself between the road and the fragile line of small bodies, the truth settled hard and certain in his mind. The courage of 10 tiny lives had already changed the shape of what was coming. Ethan did not run toward the sound of the distant engine. He adjusted to it, the way he had learned long ago when reacting too fast invited mistakes. His body settled into a familiar readiness, spine straightening, shoulders loosening, breath slowing until each inhale felt measured and deliberate. The road curved gently to the east, bordered by a shallow ditch and a line of trees that could hide a vehicle until the last moment. He positioned himself slightly ahead of the puppies, boots planted wide in the snow, making himself visible from the road while keeping Luna and the pups behind him. The instinct was automatic, born from years of stepping into danger so others wouldn't have to. Ethan Cole, the quiet civilian who drove empty roads to outrun his past, receded. In his place stood the man forged by training and loss, the one who understood how quickly hesitation could cost lives. The engine sound faded, then returned, closer now, but still unseen. Ethan's eyes tracked the soul, landscape in slices, noting angles, distances, cover. His mind, sharpened by stress, began assembling contingencies without conscious effort. If it was one of the men returning, there would be curiosity before aggression. If it was a stranger, confusion. Either way, he needed time. He glanced back briefly at Luna. She had dragged herself into a semi-upright position, forelegs trembling, body angled protectively toward her pups. Her coat, once sleek, was now dull with dried blood and snow, but her gaze remained unbroken. There was no panic in it, only readiness, the same readiness Ethan recognized in himself. He crouched beside her and cut the last length of rope binding her hind legs, careful to keep his movements slow and predictable. Luna flinched once, then stilled, trusting him not because trust came easily, but because she had judged and decided. As the rope fell away, she attempted to stand and failed, her weight collapsing back into the snow with a frustrated sound. Ethan pressed a gloved hand gently against her shoulder, grounding her. He spoke quietly, not in commands, but in reassurance, the kind he once offered frightened locals through translators who barely caught the nuance. He promised nothing he could not deliver. He promised presence. A shape finally appeared through the trees, a vehicle easing along the road, not the heavy trucks from earlier, but a faded sedan, paint-chipped, tires squealing slightly on ice. It slowed when it saw Ethan standing in the road, slowed further when the driver noticed the cluster of puppies behind him. The car came to a stop a cautious distance away. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, pulling her coat tight against the cold. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, though Ethan would learn that later. She was in her late 30s, tall and slender, with ash blonde hair tucked beneath a knitted cap, loose strands escaping to brush a pale, weather-worn face. Her skin bore the faint redness of someone accustomed to winter, and her eyes, soft brown, observant, widened with concern rather than fear as she took in the scene. Sarah moved carefully, hands visible, her posture cautious but not withdrawn. She had once been an emergency room nurse in a nearby town, a job that had taught her to step toward chaos instead of away from it, until burnout and a bitter divorce had driven her to quieter roads and shorter shifts. "What happened?" she asked, voice steady despite the shock in her expression. Ethan answered briefly, choosing words that conveyed urgency without panic. Sarah knelt immediately beside Luna, assessing injuries with a practiced glance, murmuring comfort in a tone that suggested she had done this for strangers more times than she could count. She did not ask why a man like Ethan knew how to secure a scene, or why he moved with such precision. Some questions, she understood, were not for moments like this. The sound of another engine echoed faintly again, farther this time, but enough to tighten Ethan's jaw. He weighed options quickly. Waiting was dangerous. Leaving Luna exposed was worse. He and Sarah exchanged a look that carried more communication than conversation. Ethan would scout the tree line and road. Sarah would keep the dogs calm and be ready to drive. The puppies sensed the shift, pressing closer to Luna, their small bodies shivering but silent, as if they understood that noise might draw the wrong kind of attention. Ethan moved away from the group, steps light despite the snow, eyes scanning for movement. His thoughts flickered briefly to the operation that had ended his career, the one where delayed action had allowed harm to unfold unchecked. That memory no longer paralyzed him. It sharpened him. Whatever came next, he would not wait for permission. Behind him, Luna watched, pain and resolve braided tightly together, while Sarah prepared the back seat of her car with blankets and steady hands. The soldier's instinct had awakened fully now, not as violence, but as protection, and it carried a single, unambiguous directive: get them out alive before the past caught up. The headlights returned exactly as Ethan expected them to, low, cautious, sweeping the road as if the night itself might testify against them. 2 vehicles this time, engines muted, tires crunching slowly over snow. Ethan had already moved Sarah and the dogs off the main road, guiding them behind a shallow embankment where scrub and frozen reeds offered concealment without trapping them. He stood alone again at the edge of the highway, posture relaxed in a way that only came from certainty. The past had taught him that fear was loud, resolve was quiet. As the first truck eased to a halt, the door opened, and Marco Hale stepped out, his heavy frame wrapped in a dark parka, beard rimmed with frost, eyes narrowing as he recognized the man blocking the road. Marco's confidence faltered not because he sensed violence, but because he sensed control, and it wasn't his. From the passenger side emerged Caleb Voss, jittery and pale, hands shoved too deep into his pockets, his earlier bravado replaced by a restless, darting gaze. Behind them, the second vehicle idled, its driver unseen, a reminder that numbers alone had once been enough for men like them. Ethan did not announce himself. He let the silence do the work. When he finally spoke, his voice carried evenly across the cold air, stripped of threat and bravado, stating facts rather than accusations. He named the crates, he named the clearing, he named the dog. Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the scar along his temple whitening, as memory collided with reality. Men like Marco relied on intimidation, on the assumption that others would look away. What unsettled him now was the unmistakable cadence of a man who had been trained to see through chaos, who no longer needed permission to act. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, allowing Marco a glimpse of Luna behind the embankment, her body upright despite the tremor in her legs, eyes burning with recognition. It was not vengeance she offered, only presence, the kind that refused erasure. The confrontation did not explode, it constricted. Marco weighed options and found them wanting. Caleb's breathing quickened, his hands emerging empty from his pockets in a gesture halfway between surrender and confusion. Somewhere behind the trucks, a phone buzzed, then stopped. Ethan had already sent coordinates when the engine noise first returned, using a signal he once swore he'd never need again. The sound of sirens arrived minutes later, distant at first, then undeniable. Deputy Alan Reeves was the first to step out when the patrol cars pulled up. Mid-50s, lean, with a weathered face and gray mustache, movements unhurried but precise. Years of small-town law enforcement had taught him to listen more than he spoke, to read the space between words. He took in Ethan's stance, Luna's injuries, the men by the trucks, and nodded once, understanding without explanation. The arrests unfolded without spectacle. Hands were raised. Weapons were cataloged. The trucks were searched, crates opened, evidence documented. Marco said nothing as cuffs closed around his wrists, his earlier certainty drained to a hollow stare. Caleb talked, too much and too fast, the truth spilling out in fragments that assembled themselves neatly under Reeves's calm questions. As officers worked, Sarah knelt again beside Luna, wrapping her in a thick blanket from the cruiser, her movements gentle and practiced. Luna leaned forward on shaking legs and pressed her nose briefly to Ethan's gloved hand, a quiet, deliberate touch that carried the weight of acknowledgement. It was not gratitude as humans understood it. It was recognition, a confirmation that the choice to trust had not been misplaced. The puppies, finally released from the vigilance that had held them upright for so long, sank into the snow in a loose pile of fur and breath, exhaustion overtaking adrenaline. Ethan watched them, a soft ache spreading through him, not of sorrow, but of completion. He felt it then, the subtle shift he had been chasing since the day his last mission ended in failure. Justice had not arrived with thunder or ceremony. It had arrived because someone had stopped, had chosen to look, to listen, to act when the easier path was forward and away. As dawn hinted faintly at the edge of the sky, painting the snow with a fragile gray light, Ethan understood that some missions did not end with extraction. Some ended with lives returned to the possibility of peace. And as Luna settled beside her pups, breathing steadier now, the road that had once been a place of abandonment became, improbably, a place of beginning. Sometimes a miracle does not fall from the sky in a burst of light. Sometimes it waits quietly on the side of a forgotten road, wearing the shape of a wounded dog, 10 trembling puppies, and one human being who chooses to stop. In moments like these, it feels as though God does not always reach down to change the world himself, but instead places his hand gently on a shoulder and whispers, "Go, be my hands today." Ethan stopped. Luna trusted. The puppies stood. And through those small acts of courage, something holy moved through the ordinary cold of the world. In our daily lives, we pass many roads like this one. Not all are covered in snow. Some are lined with loneliness, silent suffering, or quiet cries we pretend not to hear. The miracle is not that pain exists. It is that love still answers it. Each time we choose kindness over indifference, courage over comfort, we become part of God's quiet work on earth. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that your choice to stop, to care, to act, may be the miracle someone else has been praying for. Please share this story with those who need hope today. Leave a comment to let us know how it made you feel, and subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, compassion, and redemption can reach hearts that are waiting. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect you on every road you walk, heal what is wounded within you, and give you the courage to be a light when the world feels cold. Amen.